Alright everybody, this is Jeff Kramer coming at you from Ohio, now in Utah. I'm going to tie a streamer for you today that is a weighted minnow pattern that I call the Murdich jig minnow. And this is on a size 4 Umpqua S506H hook. The thread we're going to use for this is just 6/0. You use pretty much anything you want for this one. Now the weight for this is going to be a set of double pupil dumbbell eyes in size small, and we're going to put these pretty close to the bend in this jig hook. This pattern is not real heavily weighted, but the position of the weight is going to guarantee that it's going to ride point up and is going to sink pretty quickly given the relatively light weight. So once those eyes are in, you can go ahead and advance your thread to the rear, and the only natural material on this fly goes in next, and that's going to be a little bit of white bucktail. I prefer not to stack this bucktail in a stacker because I think it gets a little bit too square on the tail, so I just kind of finger stack it. So what you end up with is a little bit of a more natural taper to this fly. And you want this bucktail to be fairly long. It's going to be almost 2 hook lengths long. It's going to kind of a long-tailed streamer pattern. So once we get our bucktail secured, we'll go ahead and clip the excess off. Make sure that's good and tight. And then we're going to go ahead and rotate this fly over. And the next material that's going to go into this is going to be ripple ice fiber, and you can use either a pearl or this is a minnow mix, which is just a little bit dirtier white. I'm going to clip the tips of this stuff pretty square. And the trick to getting this to lay in here, because you're working around the hook point, is to have it in the butts and the tip of your fingers like this, and you're going to kind of force your fingers down over the hook point to where you can see the butts and the material around the hook shank, and give that a couple of loose wraps, and then you can crack down on it, and that's done there pretty tight. And the next step you want to do is just kind of fold this over the hook point. You want it to ride right on top of that bucktail, and then you can go ahead and wrap back over to about where you stopped with the bucktail. The pearl or minnow mix ripple ice fiber for this one, the length on this fiber, you're going to want to trim this to be about the length of the bucktail, so you can just trim it off square. Now your contrasting color of ripple ice fiber, in this one I'm going to use smolt blue. This has been the most popular, well, the most popular color pattern in this fly that I tie. And the only difference when you tie this clump in is that you want the butts to extend out about a hook length from where you tie them in. So you're not going to tie in just the very tips of the fiber, you're going to leave about a hook length worth of fiber going forward towards the eyes. In the same process, you want to try to force this around the hook point, fold it evenly. Sometimes you have to take a bodkin and work this stuff around a little bit. Once you've got it laying where you want it, go ahead and advance back over to about the same stopping point you had earlier. Okay. And our next material is going to be Bruiser Blend in Shrimp Pink. This is actually Bruiser Blend Junior. This is the perfect spot on this pattern. You can either keep it white to match the belly, which I've done on some patterns, and you can also use it as a hot spot or kind of a gill area on this fly. So you've got a little pinch of Bruiser Blend Junior. I'm going to add this right here to the side of the hook. And I just go ahead and trim out the excess we have coming off. And we're going to repeat this on each side. And try and even them up so they're about the same length. And again, we're going to trim off that excess Bruiser Blend. And now this is really the trickiest part of this fly, is you're going to want to pick up these butts of the ripple ice that you tied in the second clump, pull these back over, and you're going to want to trim these to be roughly the length of that Bruiser Blend Junior. So usually about a hook length worth of fiber there. And then we're just going to use your thumb, force this back over the top of that Bruiser Blend Junior. And again, we're just kind of pulling that fiber back over the ripple ice, back over the around the hook point, and go ahead and tie that down. So what you've done is just veiled that ripple ice right over top of the Bruiser Blend. The next step on this fly is going to be, there's two ways you can do this. You can either do this in a dubbing loop, which takes quite a while, or you can, if you have access to a dubbing brush machine, I make just plain brushes of nothing but ice dub. And the color that I use for this one is Minnow Belly. You could also use like a UV Pearl for this. So I've got a brush, so I'm gonna go ahead and tie in my brush right here around the material clump we have in the back. Use our old scissors to trim off the excess wire. And you just have to be a little bit careful when you take your thread over the tip of that dubbing brush to make sure you don't cut that. We're going to advance our thread all the way up to the hook eye. I like to throw a little half hitch in just to keep my thread there. And now we are going to wrap this dubbing brush forward. And these are going to be in fairly tight wraps going forward. And this material is going to bind down a lot on you, and you need to not worry about that because that'll all be fixed in the next step. Make sure we crisscross over the dumbbells. And then we're going to take it in front of the dumbbells and do a couple wraps up here by the hook eye. And then we'll go ahead and capture it with our thread. Fold that brush back out of the way so you can expose the hook eye. You can get a couple wraps in right in front of the hook eye. And we'll go ahead and whip finish at this point. Trim our thread out. And then we'll again use our old scissors to come in and trim out the dubbing brush. Okay, so what you have right now looks completely like a hot mess, and that is exactly what you should be seeing at this point. So the next step is going to be to take a bodkin. I've actually got a little kind of a 45-degree angled bodkin that I picked up at work. It's part of a little medical school kit. Funny little thing, little surgical kit. You're going to want to pick this out and pick out this dubbing basically straight out from the hook shank. So what you're going to end up with is, instead of a matted down mesh, you're going to have a big ice dub poof ball. You're going to want to pick this out on kind of all four sides, all around the hook shank. You can usually be pretty aggressive with this, especially if you got a good tight brush. You can pick at this pretty good. So once you've got it picked out fairly well, now we're going to go ahead and trim this. And the first cut that I'm going to make is going to go along the hook eye, right up above the dumbbell eyes. So we'll come in, draw that material up, and trim that off. And then I like to draw up the material on the bottom, and I'm going to trim flush with the dumbbell eye straight back to that Bruiser Blend Junior. Rotate your fly over, and now the material that you have kind of coming off both sides and the top, we're going to draw all that material up. And this cut is going to go from the hook eye basically straight back to under the hook point. So what you've basically done here is you've made ice dubbing into a chenille. Sometimes you have to come in and trim a little bit excess off the sides, kind of flush with the dumbbells, depending on how much material you got sticking off. And then I like to come in and just kind of give a little angled cut right here, right down to the hook eye. You could fish this fly as it is right now, but I like to add a little bit of color and detail to it. So to match the smolt blue ripple ice, I'm going to use a Sharpie in kind of a pale blue. It's like a powder blue Sharpie. And you can come in and just kind of touch this material and give it a little bit of color. And then I also like to add just a little bit of barring to these. So I'll take black for this and give one bar right over the eyes, and then a couple more coming back across the back. And then the very last step is just to take your scissors and any of the excess ripple ice you have sticking off the back for the tail, as far as that last clump of ripple ice you tied in. Instead of trimming this off square vertically, I like to angle the cut back just a little bit like this, Trim that out. Trim off any little errant fibers you can find that you want to trim out. It depends on how picky you want to be. If you want to pick all these little fibers out, you can. Not really necessary. It'll fit just fine the way it is right now. This is a great little weighted minnow pattern. Gets to the bottom quickly. Great for smallmouth, great for crappies, basically anything that'll eat a small minnow. And that's the Murdich jig minnow.